Brad Williams, Frugal Finance, Medicaid estate recovery, how states collect nursing home costs after death. Medicaid program designed to assist with healthcare costs, including long-term care, often covers nursing home expenses for individuals who might not otherwise afford them. However, after the death of a Medicaid recipient, the state may seek reimbursement for those costs from the individual state, a process known as Medicaid estate recovery. Here's an overview of how Medicaid estate recovery works, including when it applies and the potential exceptions. Understanding Medicaid estate recovery. Medicaid estate recovery refers to the process by which states attempt to recover funds spent on Medicaid's recipients' long-term care. This is often done by claiming part of the deceased individual's estate. The 1993 Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act mandates that all states pursue estate recovery for certain types of Medicaid services. The collected funds are used to finance Medicaid for other individuals in need. When a person qualifies for Medicaid, they are notified about the state's right to recover Medicaid expenses after their death. However, if the deceased has no assets, there will be nothing for the state to claim. In some cases, Medicaid may not pursue recovery at all. When states cannot recover Medicaid costs, although states are required to seek reimbursement in many cases, there are exceptions. States are prohibited from recovering Medicaid costs under certain circumstances, including surviving spouse. The state cannot recover Medicaid costs from a deceased person's estate if a spouse survives them, regardless of where the spouse resides. Minor, blind, or disabled children. If a surviving child is under 21, blind, or disabled, the state cannot seek recovery for Medicaid costs related to the deceased care. Sibling or child caregivers. Medicaid may not attempt recovery if a sibling or adult child living in the deceased home for at least 1 year before the person entered a care facility and the caregiver continues to reside there. Recovering Medicaid costs from the home? Medicaid may not always take a home from the state to recover costs, depending on the circumstances. In certain cases, a sibling who has lived in the home for at least a year prior to the person's institutionalization, or a child who cared for the individual for 2 years before their nursing home stay, can protect the home from recovery. These caregivers must also have an equity interest in the home. Limits on recovery amounts? States cannot collect more than the total amount spent by Medicaid on long-term care services for an individual after they turn 55 or are permanently institutionalized. Additionally, recovery is limited to the value of the estate. There are no assets left in the estate, or if other creditors have a higher priority, such as mortgage holders, the state will not be able to recover anything. Waivers and hardship exceptions. Some states may waive estate recovery if the cost of recovery is deemed excessive or if the home is of modest value. Additionally, heirs can request a waiver if recovering Medicaid costs would cause undue hardship. This often applies when the heirs relies on the property for income or shelter, such as in the case of a family business or farm. State variations in estate recovery. The specifics of Medicaid estate recovery can vary from state to state. In many instances, states recover funds only from a deceased person's probate estate, which includes assets that must go through the probate process. Assets like jointly owned property, accounts with designated beneficiaries, or those held in a living trust are generally not subject to estate recovery. Some states use a broader definition of estate, allowing them to pursue recovery from any property in which the deceased had legal interest, even if it bypasses probate. Medicare recovery in managed care states. In states with Medicaid managed care, where a private insurer manages care for Medicaid recipients, estate recovery may be based on the premiums paid to the insurance company, not the services the individual actually received. In such states, the state may seek recovery even if the recipient didn't use all services covered by the insurance plan. The amount the state attempts to recover varies depending on the services provided. Methods of estate recovery. Medicaid recovery can take two primary forms. From the estate after death, states may file claims against the deceased person's estate to recover costs paid on their behalf. In some states, this applies only to assets that go through probate, such as a bank account or real estate not held in a trust. Liens on a property. If a person owns the real estate, Medicaid may place a lien on that property while the individual is still alive. When the property is sold, the state can collect the recovery amount from the proceeds. However, Medicaid must remove the lien if the person returns home before death. Protecting assets from Medicaid recovery. While Medicaid recovery targets assets left after death, there are strategies to protect certain assets, especially if a person has already applied for Medicaid. Transferring assets to a family member or placing a home in a living trust can trigger Medicaid penalties if done within a specified look-back period, usually 5 years. However, exceptions exist for transfers to spouses or certain children, such as those who lived in the house and provided care for the deceased. It is advisable to consult an estate planning attorney or financial advisor before making decisions that may impact Medicaid eligibility and asset protection. Proposed changes to Medicaid's estate recovery, despite its widespread use. Some lawmakers and advocacy groups argue that Medicaid estate recovery is not always cost-effective and disproportionately burdens low-income families. While bills have been introduced to amend the rules and reduce the impact of estate recovery, no major changes have yet passed at the federal level. In summary, Medicaid estate recovery is a tool used by states to recoup costs associated with long-term care, but it is subject to the various exceptions, protections, and state-specific rules. By understanding these rules, individuals can better plan for the potential financial consequences of Medicaid coverage. Comment: if you have any expertise or if you have any questions relating to how states go about collecting from Medicaid expenses, Brad Williams, Frugal Finance. Thanks for watching. Hope that helped. See you soon.